What's going on, guys? This is James from All Hail Internal Combustion. This will be the first video we're doing for a mini series here. We're breaking down a old early 90s Honda 4-cylinder motor. This is a D16A6. This nameplate right between the transmission and the motor is how you can identify these. The D symbolizes the block series. 16 is for 1.6 liter, and the A6 is for the application. This is technically a 1991 Civic SI bottom end. So we have a vehicle for it to go in, and we'll maybe do a video on that later. And we're going to piston rings, check the lower end bearings, and give this a good overhaul. Seals, everything. It's going to be a kind of a daily driver, but it's also going to get ran kind of hard. So we're going to make sure that it's in good shape and it's ready for the abuse that I'm most likely going to put on the car. So, all right. So to get started here, got ourselves a nice table laid out here so we can lay our parts out as we take it off. We're going to start with the bottom end. We pull the crank out. We'll pull the crank girdle out first, the oil pump passage. So let's go ahead and get started. Start tearing this down. Got two 10mm bolts here. I had already broken these loose earlier. And usually on a breakdown like this, it's a good idea to just thread the bolts back in where they come from if it's convenient. Got my speeder wrench. This is the original speeder wrench my dad bought probably over 30 years ago. When he found out my mom was going to have me, he went out and bought an entire tool set so that he had something to make money with. This is one of the only tools that's original that didn't break. So this is almost a 30-year-old Craftsman speeder wrench. They don't make these anymore. So something I still use. It's nice. So when you're taking anything aluminum apart, you always want to cross over and make sure that you're loosening this evenly. Because if you don't, there's a possibility of warping it. I'm not saying that every time you do that you'll warp it, but there's a good chance you could if you don't. Ugh. So I'm not loosening them all the way, I'm just breaking them loose. X pattern if you can. See that? X. Now you can't cross over again, so then you go straight back. Cross over again. I didn't loosen them all the way up. Just enough. So it's on nice and even. Now let's start back at the beginning. Make sure they're all popped loose. And obviously on disassemble, the order is not quite as important as it is on reassemble. Reassembly, it's crucial. You need to consult your owner's manuals on the proper way to do that. So, get my adapter in here. And I didn't follow my own instructions. Put these bolts back in here. The internal motor parts, I don't like to mix the bolts up. You're bolting stuff up to the outside. Use one that's a little longer here, a little shorter there. It's not the end of the world most times. Just as long as you don't have leftovers. And you put all these back in, then you know exactly what's going on. And you never know, these could come through the bottom side. You start your motor for the first time and bang, your crank hits the bottom of that bolt because you put one in that was too long. Little side note while I'm working here, the oil cooler here on the side of the motor, that's a specific feature. Factory from Honda, just for the D16A6. And believe me, it does actually help keep the oil a little bit cooler than the D15s. I think that this motor stock, no head work or anything, is rated at 160 horsepower, I believe. Don't quote me on those numbers. I think the D15 was only rated at 98. So it was quite a bit. Most of the horsepower gain was in the head. These things do really, really well with head work. And of course, bolt-on mods like exhausts, intakes, fuel injection mods, changing fuel pressure.
Well, even the factory fuel injection, the D15 had something called the DPFI system, dual port fuel injection, which was like a throttle body. And these had the PGMFI, which came on the SI models and the more performance-oriented models.
Well, we're going to get a screwdriver here. You want to try to avoid, you don't want to pry on your gasket surface, so you can kind of rest against your crank here. Ugh. Try to get this to come off here. This motor was in my car for almost 60,000 miles when I was about 21, 22. And I beat the ever-living hell out of this motor. And it is still in good shape. This is going to be a little trickier than I thought here. Make sure I got everything out. Hammer like a dead blow. I wonder if these front caps, this cap needs to come off maybe. Got it. So just giving a little tap side to side. There we go. And there we go. That's the piston and piston and bearing caps. Oh, one bearing left behind. Now, I don't know if we'll end up reusing these. These actually look like they're in pretty good shape. This motor still ran really good when I took it out. I just tell you that I lost my license, and at the time when I took the car off the road, and I had the car crushed because there was no way I was selling it to somebody else. So I took the motor out, and it still ran great. I had no issues at all. So I don't see any. This crank looks like it's in great shape. Now, there's some, this discoloration is just from oil and heat, but it's normal. This discoloration is normal in here. There's a little bit of wearing on there, but that's really not bad at all. There's no scarring. It makes me not feel like an idiot for holding on to this motor for almost 10 years. I bet if you tried to find one of these now, you'd have a big problem. It probably wouldn't be too easy. I'll get a wrench on this and spin it around, take a look at the crank a little bit better. I'm going to find the socket to go in here. Go with a wrench, maybe. There's a 19 normally. Oh. As we roll this around, everything's looking super healthy. This is a motor that you could easily, you could push on the pistons and it would spin over on its own. So, and there's barely any carbon ridge or anything at the top of the motor. As you can see, actually when I first pulled this motor apart, I let my kids spin it around so they could see how motors worked. So, the next step is to pull the connecting rod caps off here. And you want to do those fairly evenly too. And we'll take those off and slide the pistons out so we can pull this crank out. Alright, so I got the tools together I need. 12mm socket. You just want to break these loose. You want to do it evenly. It's just good practice when you're building motors, taking them apart, to try to do everything as evenly as possible, not to stress the metal. This has been married to each other. This motor, I think, had 160,000 miles on it. So it's just good not to stress everything out as you're taking it apart. You know, you don't want to just rip and tear. Other parts of the car, you're not going to hurt nothing. But the motor, it's important to do that. And you can see that that speeder wrench doesn't work. Whoops. That's okay. Got a porch motor. Okay. So with these Hondas, the two pistons obviously are identical. One would be on intake, one's on exhaust, but they kind of pair them like that so that they are working with each other to move. So see how easy these caps are going to come off. They usually come off pretty easy. There we go. Let's take a look at these. Now this is where the bearing rides against, so it's not as big of a deal. I'm going to actually pull this piston out first. It doesn't fall out the motor, as it moves pretty easy. There she is. It actually looks like it's in good shape. And the rings don't even look wore out, and they move freely. So, and the wrist pin still looks like it's operating nicely. Now with these pistons, you want to make sure that we keep them in order. So I'm going to set them here on the table. That's my far cylinder here. Let's take a look at the bearing here. You know, you want to get a good idea how everything's running. No heavy excessive wear marks. It definitely looks like it's been ran for 170,000 miles, but no bad signs. And the crank is in great shape. This is wonderful. We'll definitely get to be able to reuse this crank as long as the other pistons look this good. So, bearing, even if you're replacing everything, bearing back in the cat back on the piston, bolts, nuts, back on the piston. Another thing you want to check too is your side to side on your piston. Make sure your wrist pin's moving back and forth. That's important as well. Although I think if you were having an issue, you would have known that well before this moment. But if the motor's been sitting around for a while, there's a good chance that it could have seized. So let's take this next piston out. This would be cylinder number 4. So we'll pop that piston out of there. You always want to have your hand down here. You don't want that piston falling out. And that kind of shows you how bad the ridge is on the other side. It's really not bad at all because that piston slid right out. I ran this motor on Castrol GTX and nothing else. It never had anything else run through it. As you can see, this is pretty clean, and I changed my oil religiously. I actually probably got about 7,000 miles per oil change. The oil just never broke down. I just changed it for peace of mind. So, cap back in. Cap back on. Nuts back on. Now, that's number 1 sitting on the table, and this is number 4. So, set them separate. All right. Get a wrench, turn the motor around, get these next two pistons out. Break them apart nice and even. There we go. Nope. Speed wrench. $19.90 impact right here. Trying to avoid from one flying across the room again. It'll be down, good, all right, down in there. Get it out in a second. Now there's a little bit more scarring inside this cap, but this is just where the bearing rides, so. Pop this piston out. Piston looks in great shape. All three rings are moving. Wrist pin's easy to go. Inside of the bearings look great. Cap back, bearing back in the cap. Cap back on the piston. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Get that other nut out of there.
Did you get it?
Yep. I'm just wiggling these caps. Sometimes they don't want to come out that easy. You gotta tap them a little bit. You want to use like a dead blow hammer or something. You don't want to hit these studs. Try to avoid that. This bearing looks good. All right. Rings move free. Oil's good. Wrist pin moves. This one looks good too. Crank looks great. We're definitely reusing this baby. Oh yeah. Here at All Hail Internal Combustion, we're very much into reusing. Trying to reuse everything we can. And also trying to squeeze as much horsepower as we can with just using stock parts. Stuff you can find off another car. So, that's kind of what we've always been into.
And you got to remember too, with Honda, they build some really good engines and they have really good metallurgy with all their parts and fitment and everything else. So if you can use a stock part on a Honda motor, by all means use it.
The crank looks good. Now, for the beginners here that might maybe not necessarily understand how oiling works, oil pump pumps oil through the crankshaft, and these holes in the crankshaft, as you can see, they're actually pretty dang big holes. That pushes oil out of those holes and keeps these bearings heated up, oiled up, so they don't get too hot. Which is why these motors have a red line of 6,500 RPM. And you can easily not red line them like you hear in the movies, but I've wound my car out to 6,000 RPM. We don't need to mention the speeds, but the motor obviously handled it just fine. So we're going to go ahead and take the front cap off for the crank, and then we're going to take the rear cap off for the back of the crank, and then the crank is ready to come out. So first things first, we got to take the timing cog off the front end. We'll spin it around here so you guys get a little bit better view. This is a crank bolt. Now, factory, if you are working with a brand new 90 Honda Civic that may have never had a timing belt, be warned that if you try to take this crank bolt off at home, you're going to have a lot of trouble. And maybe someday I could show you my little trick on how to get it off, but I guarantee that you will have a very hard time getting that off of there. Just some corrosion, a little bit of rust on there, but it's okay. This plate's also important to pay attention to how it goes on. There's one that normally goes on the front of this cog and the back. Now, if you look at this one, you can see that this is bellied in. See, it's cupped up like this. So I was facing towards the motor. I'm going to stack it like this, and I'll end up putting it back on the crank like that. So it's important that this gets put back like that.
Because that keeps your timing belt from moving around on your crankshaft sprocket.
So there's our front main seal there. I had replaced that when I did timing, so no signs of leaking. I took pretty good care of this motor, so we'll be putting another one in there. So as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 10mm bolts here. You want to do the same thing. You want to break these apart evenly. So I'm going to start here, the one at the far side, and just enough to break it loose. Jump over here to this side. Go down here to this one. And because there's 2 on this side and 3 over here, I'm going to hop up here and then do this one. Now these are fairly loose. Usually these Honda 10mm bolts don't take much. Ugh. I'll go ahead and take these bad boys out. Now these are probably all different lengths. Not entirely sure, I can't remember. We'll see here in a second. Those 2 are the same. You want to pay attention to things like that, so that on reassembly, you know if there's different sizes. Honda doesn't do it too often. Honda's usually pretty consistent on making sure things are easy. Not a lot of car companies that do that anymore. That stuff died out in the 70s. So, look at that, all of them exactly the same length. So, set those down here. Give me a second to get a little more organized here. This front plate should be unbolted. We're good to go. This will probably take a little bit to get it to come off. I believe there's dowel pins. There it goes. Nice and easy. This is your, I believe this is the oil pump passage in there. Runs off the crank here. So actually, this rolls around in here and pumps the oil through the whole motor. So, that's pretty important. We'll probably take that apart and make sure that that's cleaned out and ready. But that's not important for right now on the teardown side of things. We're going to flip this over on the table like it came off. Drop our bolts in. Alright. Now our front is free. Now we can move to the back. Now obviously we have it on the stand and I really don't want to take it off the stand. So we're going to bust these loose with a wrench. It's a little trickier, but it is what it is. It's only 4 bolts. And obviously this is the back. This is where your Your flywheel would bolt too. I have a nice 5-speed SI transmission to bolt right up to this. Freshly rebuilt. You know what? I bolt ratchet wrenches for a reason. Of course, the 20. Ah, here it is. Wow. I will say I don't ever break anything loose with ratchet wrenches. Just use it for disassembling. They're not worth it when you break it. Then you gotta wait till you go to the store to replace it. And they're pretty much weak. I'm sure some people say they break stuff loose with their snap-ons and whatnot, but I'm sure they break too. That sucker's still just a little tight. Although, you know, with the pistons out of this thing, this motor probably only weighs about 40-50 pounds with the crank in it. But can't be flopping it around with half the crank pulled out, so. And we're out. Alright, same thing back here. Be careful not to beat it too hard. Actually see a good pry location there. There we go. And of course the rear main seal looks good in this too. Doesn't look bad, but it's gonna get replaced. No point in doing this kind of work. And there's 40 pounds of weight right there. A nice Honda crankshaft in really good shape. I'm really happy with the condition of this crankshaft. Jeez, what's this?
Thrust bearing.
Oh, okay. That was here and here. Is that the only one?
Yeah.
Okay. So these are thrust bearings here. Best to keep those where they go. Everything in here actually looks like it's in really good shape. Let's check these crank bearings out. Yeah, this is great. You know, look how clean the inside of this motor is. There's not a lot of oil buildup in here, so I really, you know, I'm not one to try to two horns on brands, but a Castrol GTX that was ran in this motor's life, most of its life, really did a good job of keeping this thing clean. There's no carbon buildup. Oil passages are still perfectly clear. You can look right down inside both of them on this side. Perfectly clear in there, and the same on this side. Beautiful. That's what you want. Nice, clean, easy oil passage. That keeps your motor happy. So, we'll probably spin this thing around, finish taking the water pump and the other timing accessories off the front, because that'll all get replaced. And we'll go from there. So I'll probably take this oil diversion plate off here as well. It's feeling a little tight, so I'm gonna tighten it back up, loosen it, tighten it, loosen it. Something feels tight coming out, you don't want to snap the bolt off in it, because then you just create a headache. Take your time, pull it out slow, run it back in if it still feels really tight. Yeah, that's fine. Oh, a little corrosion. That's weird. Looks like there was antifreeze in there. That's definitely not a crazy thing. This plate, I'm sure oil comes down from the top end here, and that plate just shoots it right at the crankshaft. Those thrush bearings, you keep them nice and lubed up. I'm sure that's exactly all this plate's for. So the bolts just look a little corroded out, but maybe they butt into a coolant passage.
And this engine did spend a few years living underneath of a workbench out in our old shed at the place we used to live at, so it no doubt had things spilled on it and everything else.
Now we're just gonna rip random brackets off and get this thing stripped down so we can get it cleaned up real well. We want to make sure it's cleaned up real well, because we're gonna kind of clean it up and polish it a little bit, and I'm thinking maybe clear coat over the aluminum so it doesn't corrode again. I don't want to paint it because that'll hold the heat in. And yeah, clear coat's kind of the same thing, but these Hondas look really, because they use such great aluminum, they look really great when you clean them up. So we'll leave that plug in there for now. Yeah, everything looks good there. So let's tear the oil cooler off, because it's actually broken. The one nozzle's broken off the side there. So we'll get this off. This is the knock sensor, oil pressure sensor. There's not much else to it than that. I have the tools right here for the water pump, so we'll go ahead and take that off. This is Gates. I know that because I'm the one that replaced it. We actually had this bolt break off in here. My dad drilled this pilot hole in and actually managed to get that alternator bolt out of there. That was not fun. That happened to me a long time ago. So.
And I did it while it was in the car.
Yeah. Yes, thing got a water pump because it had started to leak. And I noticed it. I didn't have any overheating, but I noticed the water pump was seeping, so could probably reuse this water pump if I really wanted to, but I'll just buy a new one. It's not worth taking a chance on an old water pump that could possibly cause issues.
And we'll just buy a whole timing kit for it anyway, which comes with a new timing belt, water pump, all the seals you need.
Tensioner.
Yep.
So the water system, the cooling system on a Honda is actually super simple. It's very direct, easy to understand. There's basically a pipe on the back side of this water pump. There's a pipe on the back of this water pump. Wow, man, that thing really don't want to come off there. Forgot about that. The little pry area in the back. Honda's very clever with things like that. Actually, I'll put this back together. Right here on the back of the water pump, there's a little notch right here for you to stick your screwdriver in and twist. It pops it right off. You don't want to get in there on the mounting surface, you know. You want to make sure that you stay away from that with your screwdriver. Wow. That dowel pin. Well, that water pump actually looks amazing and it's tight. I can't free spin it. And the O-ring actually even still looks like it's in good shape. So, I don't know. We might end up reusing this water pump because, hell, it's in good shape and there ain't nothing really to it. So, and I know that I bought quality replacement parts for this motor before kids, so I spent top dollar on good parts. It didn't matter. And everything in there is nice and clean, like somebody may have actually been caring for this thing. So.
Oh no, it's got a finger in it. Oh, wait.
Take this tensioner off. So, tensioner shot. With all that rust on there, it's, you know, I could probably clean it up. We'll make decisions on all that, because honestly, maybe the parts I bought years ago might be better quality than what we can buy now, even if I bought the same brand. So, looks like we're going to need a big adjustable wrench. This one might not be big enough. Oh, just big enough. Get it? Oh, hell no. Maybe I should try to find a socket for that. Woo! Bust my knuckles off. Oh, first try! Woo! I swear that was not planned.
That's probably what we bought that socket for.
Oh, there it goes. All right. Now this is actually where the oil filter bolts to. Still got oil in it. That's it. All right, so we'll get these, get the knock sensor out. Probably end up just getting new ones. They are not known for going bad, but with them sitting around for so long, you just never know. Basically, these knock sensors, when they go bad, they just get kind of sensitive and they want to throw a code for everything. Or want to say, your check engine light will basically come on and blink and your car will be running just fine. You know, you just may have gotten into it a little too much. So, that may have actually been the oil pressure sensor. And this is the knock sensor. Grab that adjustable wrench again. I'm a little rusty on these. It's been almost, it's been a long time since I worked on any of these motors, but happy to get back into it. Yeah, this is the knock sensor. Actually, this is coolant. This is a coolant temperature sensor. Not the coolant temperature sensor. This is a different one. I believe this is for, I don't know. There's two coolant sensors in this thing. Like I said, it's rusty. It's been a while. So, that's it for now. We'll get back to this motor in a little bit. We'll probably We're going to deburr it and file it down and make it look really nice and presentable. So stay tuned and keep watching and tune in for our top secret Honda project here at All Hail Internal Combustion. We'll see you next time, guys.